Welcome to the Student Learning Objective training module, Power Standards. Sometimes referred to as priority standards, we call them Power Standards in COB. Thanks for joining us in preparation for your role in assessment on the SLO development team. I'm Jennifer Gates, School Instructional Specialist. This and other modules are available at your convenience on the Blackboard shell, SLO Teachers. In this module, we'll look at the following learning objectives, providing you with a strong understanding of power standards and identifying the distinguishing characteristics, reviewing connections in COB between SLO and power standards, and preparing Assessment Academy members with the foundation to identify, write, and support power standards-based assessments. Welcome. Let's remind ourselves, what is an SLO, or a student learning objective? It's a measurement of 2 points in time that shows student growth. It's used by all teachers in Georgia of non-tested subjects and helps to tell the story of how effective classroom instruction informs teacher growth, as well as professional goals related to instruction. This module helps deepen understanding of writing and developing SLOs and how our instructional standards drive the learning. Here in COB, we're developing SLOs in a three-phase process. Development using the teacher teams of outstanding educators with assessment expertise. The second stage being the review of items developed using additional collaborative teams of teachers. And then implementation of the assessment items as part of an evaluation process. Review is a cyclical process, and after implementation, items will continue to be reviewed across the course of the academic year. That ensures not only appropriate depth of knowledge and rigor in the assessments, but also the opportunity to continually refine and improve our assessments with an eye to formative growth and professional development. What are power standards, and how do I use them to develop SLOs? The short answer is that they give the instruction its strength and foundation. Power standards are essential for student success and are the ones emphasized most by teachers. They're the backbone, if you will, of the curriculum. Once a student masters power standards, they have the ability to use reasoning and thinking skills to learn and understand other curricular objectives and ideally attain a deeper level of knowledge and mastery. What's called complementary standards are used to support the instruction of power standards. Then the remaining standards are the standards to which students are exposed less or they're not required for foundational knowledge. They're to a lesser extent supporting all learning, but not required for key or foundational knowledge. If we take a closer look, we can see that power standards are basically where we live, and where we're looking at the foundation of essential questions, learning targets, and objectives, and they provide our end-of-course enrichment, remediation, and review foundation. They narrow our focus for planning and instruction and guide our students directly to understand what's critical learning and why. They may also inform student assessment and learning goals, or put another way, if we made everything a power standard, we wouldn't have the time, energy, or capacity to learn them all at a meaningful level. Also, we couldn't cover all standards in a superficial way. There'd be no deep understanding or higher levels of DOK, depth of knowledge, and cognitive complexity. In Cobb County, we believe student growth is a means of telling the classroom story. How effectively are we as educators providing instruction that works? What instructional needs do our students have, and how can we continue to improve how they're met? Well, these questions can be answered through SLOs and the research that supports strong instruction. Here's what Marzano's research shows, that the standards across 14 subject areas would require more than 15,000 hours to address adequately, but there are only more than about 9,000 hours of instruction actually available. Schmidt, McKnight, and Raisin addressed the breadth versus depth argument. Back in '96, they showed that U.S. math textbooks covered 350% as many topics as Japanese textbooks, yet Japanese students significantly outperformed U.S. students in mathematics. And while we're talking about mathematics, Marzano worked with 10 educators to identify which National Council of Teachers of Mathematics standards out of 741 were essential. They identified all 10 educators uniformly about only 40%, and there were about 145 not identified by any of the 10 educators, or about 20%. Marzano says schools should provide clear delineation of content that is essential versus that which is supplemental. And in his 2003 book called Power Standards, Identifying the Standards That Matter the Most, it was Larry Ainsworth who suggested there are 3 elements to support the identification of power standards to distinguish them from others. The first, as you see, is endurance, standards that provide lifelong meaning. The second is leverage, that is, standards that can be used successfully across multiple disciplines. And the third is essentiality, basically what's considered critical or vital information. That's what's needed for success in vertically and horizontally aligning course material and learning. That is, can the student be successful in the second half of the course or the next grade level without learning the standard? If the answer is no, then that's a standard that has power. So how do you pick power standards? Well, there's a number of ways, and this can change depending on your content area and your teaching team as well as your framework. Individual selection. As an experienced content and curriculum developer, you'll know which standards you use most often and which ones best reflect your students' requirement for learning. As an SLO developer, you'll be working with your teaching team, come to grade level or content consensus through dialogue and collaboration. And what direction do you have from the instructional frameworks, the identified CCGPS standards, those available through district resources such as Picasso? Consider what's relevant and even what's emphasized on the Georgia DOE frameworks where appropriate. Consider test and item specifications reference. What are the most commonly assessed standards and why? Be prepared to explain and communicate clearly your thinking to your development peers, and be aware of adjacent grade level collaboration and consensus. In COB, we make great use of collaboration to ensure knowledge, understanding, and use of vertical alignment from kindergarten to graduation. Make sure to refer to the alignments in order to be well aware of how standards influence other grades and how students are to progress vertically as well as within the bands. With regard to SLO development, if possible, you should bring to the session any pre-identified standards, and in a moment we'll see what documents help support that. Once in development, your responsibility will be to collaborate professionally with your peers to ensure consensus about which standards are chosen and why. And as a group, review your commitment to and selection of standards so everyone can speak effectively about the choice. Now, if needed, you can pull in your content supervisors for advice, reflection, and suggestions, and always defer to their direction. And the responsibility, we know, is a weighty one. Make sure the choices to which you commit on behalf of the Student Growth Measure, or SLO, best represent the instruction and what is good for students. Well, what do power standards do? Many things, and without even realizing, educators are pulling the power of the standards daily by helping their students understand clearly what they're learning, what they need to know, do, and understand at deep levels. They help educators focus instruction and ensure a coherent framework from K through 12 right across our system, and provide a means for purposeful collaboration amongst teachers within the grade level and grade band, within the content areas, vertically on multi-level development processes, including elementary, middle, and high. And our focus really is on commitment to college, career, and citizenship readiness, providing a means through which students can engage in lessons for lifelong learning, for productivity and achievement. In COB, we're constantly using and referencing our standards, and we find them on Picasso, where all learning standards are conveniently located and are updated as needed. After entering Picasso with your secure login, you can access the teacher version of the pacing guide, which outlines the instruction for the year based on quarter or course length, where applicable, and of course the standards, which are illustrated when you click on the Standards tab. This template view varies depending on the grade level. This one, for example, is elementary. At the high school level, the view is slightly different, but the information provided in the same manner. This is Social Studies World Geography. You can see how the pacing guide clearly indicates the first and second half of the course, and just above is the Standards tab, within which are housed the individual standards, the power standards, the elements or complementary standards, and of course those remaining standards we've mentioned previously. All of it conveniently provided and only a click away. The process of using power standards for SLO development is really an easy one. As you review your standards, either print, bookmark, isolate, or set aside standards you think are power standards for your content area. Bring those standards, if possible, with you to the development sessions. And think less this and a little more this. You'll compare what you have identified against that of your peers, and again, through professional collaboration and collegial discussion, you'll determine as a group which standards are the ones for which you'll write the SLO. Now, deciding what standards make it onto the SLO should be a friendly, professional, and best practice-based discussion. Less this, and ideally, more this. Ultimately, the process is one of professional discourse and justification of student learning. Come to an understanding about which standards are critical and why. It'll likely turn out you and your peers have similar or identical suggestions for power standards. SLO development, by the way, comes with a few musts. The state-required paperwork is a must, as is the format and the process for approval. Also a must in COB, completing the steps to aligning our power standards with DOK, the SLO assessment, and content-level understanding and communication about the final SLO. Here's a look at the progression of steps. First, teachers pre-identify power standards and ideally bring them to the SLO development sessions. In sessions, step 2, teachers identify the power standards together. And then, step 3, complete the content alignment form, table of specs or TOS, and the criteria table. All of the work culminating in 4, which is actually writing the SLO. Now, while it seems like a lot of work to get here, it's well worth the effort. as it makes the SLO assessment, or the student growth measure, meaningful, accurate, and well written. All educators in the district will be pleased and appreciative of the time, effort, and energy you took to invest in making our SLOs the best for our students and our staff. Let's take a look at those three forms mentioned earlier: content alignment, TOS, and the criteria table. We're going to start with the content alignment. This form isn't actually required by the DOE for submission, but we're using it to ensure transparency and fidelity of process. At the top, you can see where the subject is listed, and most importantly, we have the course number. In the first column, we have the standard to be addressed, and these are the power standards listed vertically. You're going to write them here once you decide as a team what standards you use in the SLO. Now over to content emphasis, which is the element of content being emphasized in this SLO, into applying the standards, where you consider what content and behaviors are key instruction in this area. You can consider these two columns to cover the nouns and verbs, that is, what's being taught, how it's being taught, what the students should know, and what they should be able to do. To the right, we see where the DOK levels are listed. Of course, for more information on DOK, visit the DOK modules 1 and 2 in the Blackboard shell called SLO Teachers. Here on the content alignment, you're making the detailed notes required during planning about DOK levels of content rigor and any related resources to support your DOK choices. Remember, those levels are 1, 2, 3, and 4, with most of our SLOs living at DOK level 2, a variety of them from levels 1 through 3. And the last column on the right is appropriate item types, which means the kind of item used with this assessment. Multiple choice is what's being used in COB in Year 1 implementation. Here's the table of specs, or TOS. At any time, don't forget you can pause this module and return to the Blackboard shell SLO Teachers to locate the individual items for reflection and review. When you return to this module, hit play and make sure your volume's on. Across the top, you can see the information related to the course, including the name and course number, as well as the total number of items on the SLO. And below, you can see that there, of course, is the required information that tells how it was written, what connects to the content and standard. There are two types of TOS, by the way, identified by item and identified by standard. Here again, you see the abbreviated items for the item types, and we're using multiple choice in COB, and the DOK level for each item that you've written. The post-administration analysis is just that. It reviews the SLO after it's been given in the classroom to the students. This will not be addressed during the development sessions. Using the criteria table, we determine how many of the elements of the required criteria for a well-written SLO have been successfully met in the assessment. The SLO team reviews the item criteria. In this case, you can see a list of 10 elements of high-quality assessments, and then determines the rating. From excellent to not applicable, the team should be able to review the SLO and come to general agreement about its quality. Ideally, every SLO meets the minimum level of criteria, which is satisfactory, or 8 of these 10 items. So keep this form handy while you're writing your SLOs. All three forms, of course, are posted to the Blackboard shell for your use and reference. Please refer to them prior to coming to the development session if possible, and always throughout. They'll be hugely helpful and a valued resource in high-quality assessment building. So as we wrap up, let's review our learning objectives for this module. We are going to take away a strong understanding of power standards. Hopefully you have. Know how to identify the distinguishing characteristics of a power standard. Review connections between our work on SLOs and power standards, and of course have the foundation to identify, write, and support power standards-based assessments. Well, you know, President Lincoln is credited with once saying, "The things I want to know are in books. My best friend is the man who will get me a book I ain't read." SLO development is new, and the process may be unfamiliar, even exciting, daunting perhaps, a challenge. No matter how you see it when you begin, the process of creating and writing high-quality, student-driven assessments for our learners in our district is an awesome one, and one that'll give you the skills and ability to be an assessment leader in your school. The book you haven't read, to paraphrase Lincoln, is the work we haven't done yet, and because the opportunity brings with it such great learning, it will be, as he puts it, among your best new experiences. We appreciate your dedication and hard work. Your initiative to join us in the SLO Academy puts you in an elite group of COB educators. Thanks for participating in this learning module, and at any time for more information, visit our website at www.cobbk12.org, Cobb Keys, as our SLO work supports the evaluation process that's expected. And for more information on power standards, use the descriptors power standards, priority standards, or educational objectives or standards in your favorite search engine, such as Safari, Google, or Yahoo. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jennifer Gates. We'll see you at the development sessions.